Hello, everyone. And today I'm joined by Gavin Smart, who may be known to some of you as the Chief Executive of the Chartered Institute of Housing, a role he took on in 2019. But in his career, Gavin's worked for the government, he's worked for the National Housing Federation and in academia. And a lot of people that I know, maybe I know strange people, say that Gavin's one of the big brains of the housing sector. And I know he already looks embarrassed when I mention it. So Gavin, firstly, not everybody watching this will know what the Chartered Institute of Housing is. So I wondered if you could say a little bit about what it is, what it does, how long it's been around, why it was formed.
Yeah, I will, Paul, and thanks for having me here today. So, yeah, the Chartered Institute of Housing is the professional body for people who work in housing across the UK and beyond. So we have members in every nation of the UK. We've got members internationally in places like China, Hong Kong, Canada, Republic of Ireland, and other places internationally too. When people ask me what CIH is for, I say that we exist to do three things. We exist for our members to provide them with the support and the advice and the networks that they want and need. We exist to train, educate and qualify the housing profession. And finally, we exist to be what we call the public voice of housing, which is reference to the policy work that the Chartered Institute of Housing does. Not all professional bodies have a policy function, but we do. And our policy function works in a very particular way because our Royal Charter says that we need to act in the public interest. So actually our policy work is done to advance the public interest rather than simply advance the interest of our members or the organisations they work for.
I guess it must be quite interesting working in Hong Kong at the moment.
So working in Hong Kong is interesting. It's an interesting challenge, and it's got more, I think, more involved and complicated over time. Although, of course, our members in Hong Kong are predominantly involved in the management of really big stock of rented homes there. So although some of the context has changed, the environment remains very much the same, and the focus of the work of Hong Kong branch CIH is to provide our members with the help and advice and support that they need to promote good practice, to promote professionalism, to do the things that we do in every country that we work in.
And coming back, you talk about your members. How many housing professionals are members of the Institute?
So there's about 16,000-ish members of CIH across the globe, but around 10,000, 11,000 of those are in the UK.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about CIH having this role in public policy, and of course housing is an issue that sort of bubbles under health and social care very often, but there is often a talk of there being a housing crisis. I just wondered what you thought the housing crisis was, if it existed, and what should be done to tackle it.
So, yeah, there's a few things to say about this, Paul. So first of all, as you alluded to, I started my career in academia, and I still do quite a lot of work with my academic colleagues. I was involved in setting up the UK Housing Evidence Centre. My academic colleagues would say it's ridiculous to talk about a housing crisis because a crisis is something that's unpredictable and comes along and shocks you, and this is being on forever. So you can hardly say that it's a crisis. Technically, I'm sure they're right. Pragmatically, I think I'd beg to disagree with them and say actually we are in an enduring housing crisis in the UK. And actually, you asked me earlier on about what are the roots of CIH. Well, the roots of CIH come from another period of housing crisis, which was a crisis with much of terrible conditions as supply. And Octavia Hill, who really started the housing profession in the UK, was determined to do something about it. That's where CIH comes from about 100 years ago. But the crisis we face now, I think, is a combination of a crisis of inadequate housing, but a crisis also of simply not enough housing. And that leads to a whole range of problems, but they can all be grouped together under the banner of saying that we failed the test of being able to properly, securely, decently and affordably house the whole of our population. There are too many people for whom housing is insecure, too many people for whom housing is fundamentally unaffordable, too many people for whom the homes they live in are not decent and do not contribute to good health and good well-being. There's a big job of work to fix that.
And does CIH have a prescription for that problem?
We do have a prescription, Paul. We think that a large part of dealing with this problem is getting on top of the supply challenge that we face, and that in particular we need to be building around about 90,000 homes a year of homes for the most affordable social rents as part of a much bigger program of probably 300,000 homes a year, 90,000 homes a year for social rented homes at the most affordable, cheapest rents. Because actually that's where the real pressure is. The real pressure is for people on low incomes or people who are either fully or partially dependent on benefit payments to make ends meet. And there's simply insufficient supply of decent, affordable housing to meet that housing need.
And I mean, I see quite, particularly online, I see a lot of people saying that they feel that the problem is that the planning system is broken, that it makes too much land unavailable for housing, for example, the green belt. We've seen a lot of discussion by the government about how does it change the planning system, and has come up with a series of reforms. I think some of those reforms might have been quietly dropped, but we've still got a planning reform bill going through the process. And I just wondered, do you have a particular view on, firstly, the importance of the planning system? I know there's quite a lot of planners who watch this podcast, and also in terms of the role that planning reform the role it can play in actually meeting that target of 300,000 homes.
So without a doubt, Paul, the planning system is critical to all of this, because the planning system is the tool that we use in the UK, not only to allocate which land is developed, but also what it's developed for, and the mix and some of the rules about what it needs to look like and the quality. And so it's a critical part of the framework. What I would say is that I think that there have been moments in recent history where for people from various backgrounds, for various reasons, have suggested, well, we just need to fix the planning system and the rest of it will be fine. That's not a view that I subscribe to. I think that the crisis we face in housing it has a multitude of drivers, but planning has to be part of the solution. The second thing I think is I don't think it's fair to say that the planning system is completely broken and doesn't do anything right at all. But it would also, I think, be lacking in credibility to say that it's so perfect that it can't be further reformed and improved. And so the government has taken a view about some changes that they think would be good to see in the planning system. I think for me it's a mixed bag. So there is some stuff in the proposed planning reforms which I think I would welcome. I think getting back towards a kind of standard objective way of assessing housing need and planning for need on the basis of that seems to me to be a good thing. The government has set out an agenda that says we want to see local communities more widely and more fully involved in planning decisions and in the kind of the bigger picture planning strategies that are in place in any given area. Why would you not want that? And actually, we also know that does lead to better planning decisions and to planning strategies which are more likely to garner widespread support, and that actually deals with some of the problems we get of NIMBYism if we don't do that. But there are also contradictions in some of the government's proposals around planning, particularly I think around quality, where on the one hand the planning proposal said we want to see an increase in quality, but on the other hand it proposes an increase in the use of the permitted development regime. The permitted development regime is essentially a way of sidestepping normal planning requirements, and I think in my experience it has been used to produce some housing that's really pretty poor, and certainly not housing fit for the future. certainly not housing which would meet the standards that I think you and I would want for our family or friends or for somebody in housing need, and certainly not producing the kind of homes that we need to produce in order to meet some of the environmental challenges that we face in terms of their overall performance. So I'm concerned about the extension of the permitted development regime. I don't think that that's a very wise choice. So it's kind of good in parts, Paul. Is it worth looking at the planning system? Yes. But does the planning system overall, will fixing planning fix the whole problem? No, it won't.
I mean, we know there's been a lot of debate in Parliament about where new housing should go, and the standard formula suggested a lot of that new housing should be in the southeast of England. I think that caused some difficulties for the government, and also I think they would say contradicts their approach to levelling up. Where does this? What's the CIH view about the location of housing and how that can be best delivered? Do you want a local authority based calculation that's done in some sort of objective way, or do you want something that's more driven by wider public policy?
So I don't know if this is a CIH view or Gavin's view, but I think this is the first point in our conversation, Paul, where I'm going to reach for the whole old chestnut that it's complicated. But I think you should start from a local authority-based objective assessment of need, because local authority is the planning authority, you need to have a view there. And not least of all, because actually you do need to plan for housing for where people are. So we have to start from where are people now, where is need now. My kind of personal view is that that's not enough, because if you only do that and you don't understand the interaction between housing and planning and economic development and longer scale plans that you might have for economic development, all you simply do is sort of follow the flow of what the market is doing at the moment. And in practice, I think we also need to be trying to plan for what government would like to see happen, what local government would like to see happen, what we would like to see happen at the regional level. And so I think it isn't just as simple as kind of following the market and following the numbers. But I wouldn't support a view of the world that says, well, we should just build housing for what we would like to happen. We have to build housing for what is happening on the ground as well. So that's a long way of saying it is complicated. But I would start from the evidence and then also look at what are our long-term strategic ambitions that we're trying to deliver as a country, not only around housing, but also about economic growth and development.
Mm. So one of the roles that you talked about for the CIH is obviously promoting the sector as a sort of career of choice. I'm often these days sitting in meetings with colleagues from a wide range of housing organisations who are finding it incredibly difficult to recruit and also to attract young people into the sector, and talk of a skill shortage within the sector. What is the CIH? Where does it feel it positions itself within that? Because obviously some of the areas where it's difficult are things like construction, and there are other bodies that deal with those sectors. But what's your role in promoting the sector as a career?
So without doubt, we do have a role, and actually I've got an ambition for our role to grow over time. Like most professional bodies, we're not that big. So one of the challenges we face is a kind of resourcing challenge. But in an ideal world, I'd like us to do even more, because I think we do have a role to promote the housing profession and to promote housing as a career, because it's a fantastic career. What is interesting about housing is that the way I would describe it's a career of destination. People come to working in housing often by a variety of routes, some quite circuitous, sometimes having worked in other careers previously. But when people arrive in housing, they tend to stay. And they tend to stay because it's a really interesting, challenging, rewarding profession to work in. But for me, that's not enough, because I think what that tells you is that actually more people would like housing, and more people would choose housing as a career if they were more aware of it. So there is work for us to do, working with our members, working with people like you, Paul, working with the organisations that you and others work for, to make the case to say, actually, look, working in housing is a brilliant place to work. It's a really rewarding profession. It offers a huge variety, because there's a massive variety of roles within housing and housing organisations, and you can build an entire career here. You can do a whole load of really interesting things and as I think is increasingly attractive to younger people, it's a profession and a sector with a really, really strong social purpose. You are delivering and doing good by doing that work, and I know that is a thing that for kind of the millennial generation and others that have come later, actually working in a role with social purpose is also really important. So we've got a lot of things to our advantage. Could we do more to promote it? Should we do more to promote it? Yes, we should.
I mean, why do you think? I mean, obviously the CIH, as you said, has been around in one form or another for a century. Why hasn't that message got out? Because, I mean, certainly my experience, I mean, I've got a degree in astrophysics, which you wouldn't think would be one that would line you up for a career in housing, is that it's been a phenomenal sector to work in with lots of great people doing great stuff. And you can quite often feel very proud of what you see the sector doing. I just wonder why it's so difficult to attract people into it. And obviously, if we attract more people into it, you would be bigger as the CIH.
We would be big. Also true, Paul. Well, actually, the first thing to say is that you and I will both know people actually who have quite deliberately chosen to work in housing. So, for instance, my colleague Melanie Rees, who's our CIH's head of policy, Mel decided at 16 she wanted to be a housing officer. She wanted to be a housing professional, and she went straight through and qualified. And you do meet people who do that. So it's not that it never happens, but you're absolutely right. There are, well, I was going to say there's not people with astrophysics degrees. There probably aren't. You're probably a limited edition model, Paul. But there are plenty of people who've come from other backgrounds and who have found housing. And it may be it's quite hard to put your finger on it. I think some of it is about the fact that housing is a profession that spans quite a wide variety of different kind of activities, and that maybe makes it a little bit harder to grasp. I think maybe some of it is that we could have and should have done more work to promote the profession and say there is this thing called housing. It is a sector in its own right, and you can actually sort of self-identify as a housing person and come and work in housing and have a really, really rewarding career and become a housing professional. And there is more of a case to be made for that, Paul, without a doubt.
And I mean, I was not particularly excited when I heard that the institute was publishing a set of professional standards, and they came out. I think it was either earlier this year or last year. Time has become sort of almost meaningless during the coronavirus. But actually, when I read them, I thought they were really inspiring. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit about the professional standards, what they are and what their purpose is.
Yes, I can. And in a minute, I'm going to flip to a set of notes to make sure I don't want a kind of Miliband moment, as it were, or I miss out a critical part of
I thought you were going to bring in a huge stone with them engraved on for a minute.
That is an interesting thought, but I won't do that, Paul. So where do the professional standards come from? Well, the professional standards come from actually me and my colleagues engaging in a little bit of kind of like critical self-review and saying, well, yeah, what are the things that that one should have? What does it take to be a professional body that's doing its job really well? And you definitely need a kind of code of conduct and an ethical code, and that's something we have. And you definitely need a kind of a body of knowledge, which is the stuff that you teach, and an agreed view about what good practice looks like. But when we challenge ourselves by looking across the professional body sector to say, but what else do other professional bodies do? We did decide that we were missing something, which was a kind of a collected statement that says, but this is our view of what it takes to be a housing professional. And what sets the professional standards aside, Paul, is because, as you've identified, they're not just about, well, a housing professional should know some stuff. That's the kind of body of knowledge stuff, really, really important. And there is a professional standard that's about knowledge. But a large part of it is actually about behaviours and attitudes and what it takes to be good at your job and good at your role as a housing professional. Because actually being a professional is about values and it's about judgment as much as it is about knowledge. So overall, what our professional standards say is they list a series of criteria that you should be looking to kind of assess yourself against if you are a housing professional. And we say things like, well, a housing professional acts with integrity. A housing professional is inclusive in the way they go about doing their work. A housing professional is ethical. A housing professional is knowledgeable and is skilled. They're also an advocate for their profession, for the work that they do, and that we would expect a housing professional would show leadership, which is about taking responsibility, about doing the right thing even when nobody is watching. So that is a range there. That's the 7 criteria. There's a range of things there, some of which are about knowing stuff, some of which are about knowing how to do things. Quite a lot of it, though, is about how you behave, what your attitudes are, the judgment that you show. And it's only by putting that all together that we would say that you become a kind of complete housing professional. And that view of the world, I would argue, is what separates being a professional from being somebody who is very, very good at something, or somebody who behaves in a very good way in a particular environment. We expect that a professional kind of is a cross-court player and can do the lot.
I mean, the sector's been getting a bit of a bad press actually recently. The ITV have done a number of investigations and have found the sector lacking. How can that be happening when we've got this set of very aspirational and ethical professional standards within the sector?
Well, I guess the easy get-out answer, Paul, is to say, well, can't expect miracles in 6 months. It will take a while for the standards to be in and to be adopted. But no, more fundamentally, I think one of the things about, I guess, being realistic about being a professional is to recognise that our aim should be to do a really good job and to get it right first time. But we should also understand that mistakes will happen. And I think one of the things that the ITN programme has demonstrated is that actually we, as a sector, have work to do. And I don't want to single out the individual organisations here, actually, because I think it's a collective responsibility. We do want to drive down our error rate, if you like, but we also need to recognise that there will always likely be an error rate. And then what matters is how you respond when things go wrong. And some of the stuff that the news reports have shown is that we haven't really got that as right as we ought to have done. And one of the things that's why I laboured the point a bit about the professional standard that is around leadership, because leadership sometimes just takes one person to say, actually, guys, we're getting this wrong. This isn't working. I know we've been trying, but what's happening with this person, with this home, or with this estate isn't right. It doesn't meet our standards. We do good work in lots of other places, but right here, right now, this isn't good enough, and we need to fix it. And I hope that over time, the professional standards will help people to feel kind of empowered and enabled to have those kind of conversations. But as I say, what I'm trying not to do here is point the finger at anybody who runs an organisation, as you do, as I do. I think we would both agree that we would both be deluded if we believed that everything that our organisations were doing right now, as you and I are speaking, is exactly what we would want to happen, because mistakes happen, and sometimes people actually just do the exact opposite of what you asked them to do. And it's about going back to the drawing board, starting again, admitting you got it wrong, fixing it, and then looking at how you can be better.
I mean, from my own organisation, I would say that we probably haven't spent as much on maintaining our properties as we should, as we've tried to meet government objectives around new build. And I think we've seen a number of organisations in the sector sort of talking about refocusing with much more investment into their existing housing.
I think that's right. So I think that the sector is engaged in a bit of a kind of, let's call it a kind of collective moment of reflection to reach for something really ambiguous. But by that I mean that there has been a real push on building new homes. Not surprisingly, given the earlier part of our conversation about a housing crisis and housing need. But there is always this risk that you overcorrect. And if you overcorrect, that within a kind of zero-sum game of finite limited resources, usually something else doesn't happen. And I think there has been a collective moment of reflection where we, as a sector, have recognised that by pushing so hard on new supply, there is a risk that we have not thought enough and maybe have not invested enough in some of our existing homes. And quite rightly now, there are conversations happening, I know in your organisation, but up and down the country, to say, actually, we've got to make sure we're getting the balance right here. Because doing the work that we do and trying to do really good work for people in housing need right now and building new homes to address that cannot happen and should not happen at the expense of letting down the people that we previously housed. That's not the right framework. It's not what anybody would have wanted to happen, but it looks as if there have been instances where we've got that wrong.
And which is a great segue into another area, I guess, which is the fallout from Grenfell, not the fallout in terms of the building safety issues, but in terms of the extent to which organisations take real notice of what their customers and tenants are saying. And we've obviously seen the white paper that's been produced by the government. And as a sort of response to that, the National Housing Federation produced their Together with Tenants document and programme. Where do you see the CIH's standards fit in within this idea that there should be much more engagement and genuine consultation with the people who are actually receiving the service, who often haven't chosen their landlord? If again, I think about my organisation, but I'm sure it's true for most housing associations and local authority housing departments. We weren't chosen by our customers. Our customers were told, you desperately need housing. This is a property for you. It would be in your interest to take it. And therefore, we're sort of forced upon our customers as their service provider.
Yes. So you're right. That certainly one of the relatively unusual features of the social housing sector is that effectively, because it's in kind of slightly kind of economic terms, it's a rationed good. So there has been an absence of choice for at least some of the people who might be housed there. But what I would say, and actually what the professional standards say, when we talk about things like acting with integrity, being inclusive, showing leadership. Some of this is about recognising that part of what it takes to be a good housing professional and good at your job is to make sure that you're properly engaging with, listening to and acting on what the people that you work for and with are telling you about their homes, their aspirations, the communities and the areas that they live in. And that's part of what it takes to be good. And actually, why would you not want to do that? Show me any commercial organisation that is not interested in what its customers think. And for us as housing professionals, actually, you probably heard me say this before, Paul, the relationship that we have with the people that we work for and with, frankly, is rather more enduring than the relationship your local newsagent has with you when you buy a Mars bar. Now, if they could be interested in you, well, we should definitely be interested in tenants and residents, customers that we work with, because we're talking about people's homes and people's lives. And home is where the foundation from which people build the rest of their lives. And if home is not right, it's very difficult to build the rest of your life. We should take what people are telling us about the homes, about their lives, about their communities really, really seriously. And I would argue it's an integral part. You can't be a good housing professional without doing that. It's an integral part of the job. The challenge, I think, is that the way in which we do that now, I think, needs to change to recognise the changed context within which we're working. There was a time, I think, probably when community engagement, tenant and resident engagement did probably consist of not much more than asking people to file into dusty community centres and church halls, and that was effective because you could reach the vast majority of the people you work with. We know that doesn't work anymore, so we have to find new and different ways of making sure that everyone has a voice and that we are reflecting on what we are being told. What I say, Paul, when I go to talk to, as you do, I know, I sometimes get invited to go to talk to housing organisations at executive team away days or board away days, and when we talk about tenant and resident and customer voice, what I say is that it seems to me that one of the tests is not what have we done it and have we reached it down, have we listened, but actually let's challenge ourselves, show ourselves where our organisation has changed a big decision or changed strategic choice as a result of what we've been told by the people that we work for and with. Because I think it's only when that is happening that you could be sure that it's going to the heart of you as an organisation, the heart of your work as a housing professional. It's not just enough to listen, it's about hearing and taking action as a result of
And moving on, we're in a period of the government undertaking a spending review against a backdrop of sort of wartime like public expenditure, and a feeling that public expenditure is not necessarily out of control, but certainly massively increased. We've had announcements recently about potential funding of the care system. There are issues around health and how the NHS is sustained in a period when its waiting lists for surgery is risen dramatically as the country is concentrated on the pandemic. We've also seen the government announce that it's going to withdraw the extra £20 a week that it was giving to people through universal credit. So, the government is, under immense financial stress, particularly in peacetime. I don't think there's been anything quite like this. And yet, in a spending review, the housing sector will be trying to make the case, I'm guessing, for more money to be spent on delivering that social housing you mentioned at the beginning, for projects like Housing First, which help homeless people off the streets and give them support, and I guess a whole load of other benefits, regeneration of rundown estates, etc. Why should the government make housing a priority when there are so many other things so many other tough spending decisions it's having to take, and how are you going to pitch it?
Yeah, it's a good question, a good challenge, Paul. I feel compelled to begin my answer to you with making a bit of a policy wonky type observation, which is, of course, we shouldn't assume that this is entirely a zero-sum game, because every government can take a view about the level of public debt across the short, medium, or longer term, the degree to which you might regard particularly capital investment as investing to create assets which are for the nation's benefit in the longer run. So some of the arguments that I would want to make actually belong in that kind of space, which is to say, treating it all as if we're spending it on a party that's going to happen tomorrow is not the right way to think about government expenditure. But that said, you're right. The government is under huge pressure. Everybody will be making the case for more. I guess I would take you back to where we were a few moments ago, which is to say, housing is about home, and home is the foundation stone from which people build the rest of their lives. And actually, if you can get that right, you can increase the likelihood of producing or having a kind of a population that is secure, that is economically productive, that is less likely to make a demand on other government services. So we know, for instance, that poor housing creates health problems, which makes a knock-on effect on the health system. Poor housing creates knock-on effects on the social care system as well. So we can help with some of those other budgets. There's a bit of a spend to save type argument. But I also think there is also a very strong argument about just doing the right thing. And by that I mean, I think we all knew that the housing crisis, as you described it at the start of our conversation, has really, really shockingly awful impacts for individuals and for households, for those people for whom the system fails. But I think COVID has brought that into even sharper focus. The people who we asked to take the biggest risks during the pandemic, the people who are out working when the rest of us were able to be working at home, the people who got ill, and the people who probably sadly large numbers are predominantly also represented by people who were not well housed. And in some cases, actually, the fact they were not well housed contributed to their increased likelihood of becoming ill and on some occasions dying. We are relearning the lessons that the Victorians taught us, that Octavia Hill taught us about poor quality, overcrowded, unaffordable housing and the knock-on consequences that it has. So at some level, I think this is also an argument from a kind of a moral argument about a nation's duty to house its people properly. It does pay back in economic terms, but I don't think any of us can be satisfied with what COVID has taught us about the state of housing in the UK right now.
And what do you think it has taught us about the state of the housing?
I don't think our housing is fit for purpose. I think it's taught us a few things, Paul. So first of all, we have too many people living in overcrowded, insecure, unaffordable, poor quality housing, and we need to do something about that. Some of that is the degree to which the private rented sector has grown in recent years, and I'm not trying to here to suggest that every private landlord is terrible, although there is no role for the private rented sector, but we've expanded the role that we're asking it to play in terms of housing older people, housing people with care and support needs, housing people on very, very low incomes. It's not well placed to play that role, and I think we've allowed that to happen kind of by accident, but that has proved to be a poor choice. I think we've learned some pretty strong lessons about building quality and building design, about the importance of outside space, about the importance of having space at home from which to work, about the importance of having weather like the weather we've got at the moment, homes that not only keep you warm in the winter but can keep you cool in the summer. So we've learned quite a lot about the quality of our housing as well. So there are things that we need to reflect on in terms of where we plan to go next with housing policy, because I'm not sure that we will build, manage, run housing in the way, or we shouldn't plan to build, manage and run housing in the way we've run it in the past, given what COVID has taught us about some of the shortcomings of that model.
I mean, you make a very compelling case. How optimistic are you that government is listening to that? And importantly, I guess, in this, the Treasury is listening to that.
So I think I'm only moderately optimistic, because it's really hard to read the rooms in a political environment like the one we're in at the moment, Paul. And you're right, it can't just be like a kind of sponsor department or departments. It can't just be Ministry of Community Local Government, Ministry of Health and Social Care who get it and take it seriously. It's got to be the whole of the government, including the Treasury machine, and the way in which the Treasury thinks about investment in housing and the return that it sees on that investment. And we've got a job there, I think, to challenge some of that decision-making process. In particular, I think there is still, to my mind, too much likelihood that Treasury models will tell them again that, well, maybe it's a bit cheaper just to throw a bit more money at housing benefit than it is to throw at building properly decent, secure homes for the longer term. Even though that you and I, being long in the truth policy wonks that we are, know that every time government has made that decision, the housing benefit bill has proved to be twice as big and twice as uncontrollable as any model that the Treasury might have constructed told them it would be. I think my job, and if I could be cheeky, your job, is to remind government of that lesson and to say, we've been here before, we've convinced ourselves on the back of spreadsheets that it's a short-term problem, we can plug the gap with housing benefit, that will be far cheaper than the capital money required up front to build decent, high quality, secure, affordable homes. It doesn't work. We've been there before. We've tried it before. We need to do it right this time.
And one of the things I know about the CIH is every year it has a new president. Nobody quite of the stature of Trump yet, or certainly of that sort of ilk. I'm glad to say, but your new president has talked about a campaign playing on the word hopeful to creating the word homeful. And I wonder if you could just say a little bit about that and what the CIH will be doing around it over the next year.
Yeah, so our new president is Joe Richardson, who is now a university lecturer working in kind of housing, both in teaching and in research at De Montfort University in Leicester, but actually has worked in the past for CIH and started a career as a frontline housing officer. I want to address really early formative experiences, which she talks about. She was going to New York just after she graduated and seeing a kind of, at that point, the kind of appalling levels of, well, not just street homelessness, kind of street destitution that you saw at that point, and thinking that we surely must and can do better than this. We should address this problem in the UK. And so a long-term kind of, not only interest, but a long-term kind of focus and passion for Jo has been addressing homelessness and dealing with homelessness and trying to solve homelessness. And so she's made that the focus of her presidential campaign. She'll be raising money for homelessness charity as part of that, but also looking to do a big bit of what she would describe as kind of action research, which is actually getting out there to say, so yeah, what does really good practice of dealing with homelessness, and particularly street and youth homelessness, look like right now? What can we learn? What can we share to make sure that we are maximising our chances of dealing with homelessness and solving homelessness? What does good look like? How do we challenge ourselves to do better? And what can we as a profession do, as well as just saying to government, you have to do more? It's not, government does have to do more, but it's not just about government, it's about all of us. So there are two things going on. There's a charity fundraising and awareness issue, but there's also a piece of work working with and for the profession and people and our colleagues who work in homelessness to say, let's really work out what the best looks like, and then let's share that and make sure that we're all operating at the better end of the spectrum.
It sounds like a fantastic piece of work. I'll be really interested to see how that campaign develops. I mean, if there was sort of one or two things you'd like to leave the listeners who are still here with at the end of our discussion in terms of either the CIH or the housing world as it is now, what would that message be?
Good question, Paul. I guess a couple of things. So first and most importantly, and I guess I would say this, wouldn't I, but I believe it, that actually housing is a profession. Thinking of ourselves and acting as professionals, taking things like the professional standards seriously, and looking to make sure that we professionalise the way we work and professionalise ourselves as a sector. I think it's a really important thing to do, and I think it can play a really important role in addressing some of the shortcomings that you and I have talked about in the earlier part of our conversation. I think also actually it will help to improve the esteem in which housing and the housing profession is held by other professions working adjacent to us and in the community more widely. So actually, housing is a profession. Let's talk seriously about professionalism, about professionalising the sector and taking it seriously. The second thing that I guess that I would want people to take away is possibly, despite all the evidence of the country over the years, because you and I spend our lives trying to deal with what is not good rather than what is good, but actually it doesn't have to be this way. We've talked a lot about the failings of the housing system in the UK. We've talked a lot about a housing crisis, and it's easy to get despondent in the face of something that big. But I passionately, fundamentally believe it does not have to be that way. There are things that we can do to improve it. There are big things and there are little things, and we can make a difference every day. And one of the things that gets me up and walking all the way downstairs to go to work, as we do at the moment, is actually believing that we can make, every single day we can make a difference. Every single home that is built new, every single home that's refurbished, every single repair that happens, what we're doing there is we're trying to work with people to give people proper security, proper home, and a proper foundation from which to build. And that's a brilliant thing to do. And it tells me that we can do better. And although I painted quite a bleak picture about the nation, the state of the nation and the housing crisis, it doesn't have to be like that. We can make progress and we can make it better.
Well, thank you, Gavin, for your time today and your insights. And I think there's a very positive message on which to end, which is that we can make things better and we can learn from what we've done over the decades, centuries, and actually improve upon them. So, Gavin, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks very much.